Photorealism is the art of taking a picture and using it to replicate the image onto a canvas with precision and accuracy to be factually and metaphorically accurate to reality, but it was primarily in the United States from the late 60s to the early 70s. Photorealists would mimic specific effects in the photograph for the aesthetic. Some of the effects that they would include were glare, motion blur, the depth of field, which we see here in this painting by Close, where his primary focus is on the facial features and everything else in the back is kind of blurred out. Chromatic aberration, and barrel distortion, which added a slight definition and bending. It's hard to see here, but if you pause the video, you can slightly see the bend in the painting. Photorealism questioned traditional arts in the sense that it couldn't be determined the differences between reality and artificiality. It emphasized the control and almost machine-like precision which was used to retaliate against other art forms that were too emotional, unstructured, and had a self-indulgent aesthetic. Meisel even stated about photorealists, they didn't drink, they didn't smoke, or do drugs. They were among the most stable people of any that I've ever seen, just making work that required stability and seriousness. Now, during the time period, people weren't very fond of photorealism because it didn't have any deeper meaning and it was just a photograph in their eyes. It was more theoretical paintings that were popular during the 60s and 70s. Not only that, but people also viewed photorealists as the cheaters of the art world because they were so dependent on photographs while painting that the use of a photograph was too much of an aid, and the finished piece was purely an imitation. So, think of it this way. World War II ended in the mid-40s. The Cold War was a major element of the 50s. The so-called theme throughout the 60s was a great society. Vietnam War was occurring. People were fighting for civil rights. Nixon was president. The assassination of Kennedy. The prices of oil skyrocketed due to the oil embargo. Notice how many car paintings there are in this period? The whole Watergate scandal. The negative effects from Jimmy Carter's administration, and the Iran hostage crisis. Politically, though, photorealism came to light in the wake of the Vietnam War and its humiliating withdrawal in the beginning of 1973. Many art historians and 70s writers saw photorealism as an expression against the background of the 30s, such as the Depression era of American realism. The fact that photorealism is framed by a series of events that led Americans to lose faith and confidence in their American government, as well as the influence of Marxism in the opposition to communism, is really the reason why we see so many depictions of post-war American landscapes highlighting the Vietnam War pessimisms, the struggle of the working class, and a big interest in machinery and industrial objects. Now, as we move away from the more political reasoning, the psychological reasons to the creation of the movement is that they evolved out of pop art, and they were counteracting abstract expressionism and minimalism. Photorealism wanted to bring back the meaning of art. It was truly a retaliation to the current art movements, especially abstract artists, for their lack of precision and their looseness. Photorealism came to light the same time conceptual art, pop art, and minimalism did, but they wanted to show a mix of what was real and what was not exactly there. Because of the photographs, rather than direct observation, it would show that what they actually observed wasn't skewed. Even though pop art is slightly a sister movement to photorealism, Due to the common aesthetic of photographic popular media during the era, photorealists often thought of pop art as superficial and just illustrative. Photorealists even criticized earlier Western realisms because they had deemed to be merely impressionistic. Louis Meisel, the world's most prominent collector and scholar of photorealism, was kind of like the backbone of it because he determined the 5 steps it took to becoming a photorealist. The first rule was the use of a camera in photographs to gather information. Second, the use of a mechanical or semi-mechanical means to transfer the information or photograph onto a canvas, like a slide projection or a grid transfer onto a photosensitized paper or a canvas. Third, you must have had exhibited work by 1972 to be considered a central photorealist. 4, you must have had the ability to make the finished work look photographic. And lastly, 5, you must have at least devoted 5 years to the development and exhibition of photorealism. Now, a little fun fact, Meisel didn't consider artist Malcolm Morley a photorealist painter because he used toy models to gather information instead of photographs. But he considered the artist Dwayne Hansen one of the founding fathers of photorealism, even though he did sculptures. Since we now know a little bit more about photorealism, we're going to take a closer look into the primary artists, such as Chuck Close, Richard Estes, and Dwayne Hansen. But we're also going to add a bonus artist, Don Eddy. Chuck Close suffers from face blindness disorder, which means he's unable to recognize faces. We see this in his earlier works where his subjects don't have any facial features. But by painting portraits, he's able to recognize and remember faces. He even concluded in an interview that it took him 20 years to realize that the whole reason why he puts all of his focus in his portraits is due to his disability. To explain the grading method we spoke of earlier, Close believed that his dependence on the grid was a metaphor for his analytical process, in which it suggested that the painting as a whole is more than just a sum of all of its parts. Close mentioned in another interview, "I went to the Seattle Art Museum with my mother for the first time when I was 14. I saw this Jackson Pollock drip painting with aluminum paint, tar, gravel, and all that stuff. I was absolutely outraged, disturbed. It was so far removed from what I thought art was." This quote actually gives us a little bit of insight of what photorealists really meant by bringing back the meaning of art. Next up, we have Estes. Now, his paintings weren't all that based off of one photograph, but they were actually based off of multiple photographs where he would move elements around to strengthen the composition and to control the visual effects. In fact, viewers had a hard time trying to match his paintings with actual locations. They often discovered surprising inconsistencies between his paintings and what was actually there. This was really due to his split-screen-like theme, where it made the end result appear like you were looking at almost 2 different paintings. Now, Estes wouldn't include things like glitter or snow into his pieces, because he believed that it would distract the viewer way too much from the buildings and his main focus. No, I get it. Photorealism is supposed to be about paintings and all that, right? Well, Dwayne Hansen was actually a sculpture artist in photorealism. The typical process would be to take 1 to 40 plus photographs to capture the purity and the essence of their subject. Then to begin painting, they would project the image onto a canvas to capture the color and light and how it would reflect off of certain elements. But Hansen did things differently. Hansen would start off by taking a Polaroid photo of the model posing as relaxed as possible so he could capture everything naturally. Then he would cover the model with a fast-setting silicone, and then after the mold was cut off, he would fill it with a liquid polyester and a resin reinforced with fiberglass. Then after that was set, he would solder the seams and smooth out any flaws. The sculptures really had to be made in separate pieces in order for everything to set properly. But when he put it together, he liked to work from the feet up so he could get the positioning perfect. The sculptures are made out of fiberglass to make the revealed skin look as realistic as possible, with veins, blemishes, and all. Hansen doesn't have many of his earlier pieces because he destroyed them all so he could be better known for what he calls his mature style. His original pieces were considered to be more violent statement pieces, and then he moved into basic, boring, everyday subjects for a satirical effect. Two examples from his earlier style are Abortion, which was a statement piece about backroom procedures, and Policeman and Rioter, which is a statement piece about the Detroit riots of '67. Finally, our bonus artist, Don Eddy. He wasn't one of the more mechanical artists, but as a child, Eddy worked at his father's auto shop, where he would mix paints and match the exact color of the car. This ended up helping him while painting his pieces, where he would eyeball the photograph and then mix his paint. He still has and uses the same tool that he used as a child, like shown here. Estes didn't even like using a projector for outlining or getting the image down, so instead he would map it out on the canvas himself. To gather his information, he would take over 40 pictures just to ensure he would get the sharpest and the most clearest products as possible. He is known to be one of the more respected artists in photorealism for his techniques. At the end of it all, photorealism has fed into hyperrealism, but there's still a difference between hyperrealism and photorealism. Hyperrealism is more than just a technique. It adds emotion and more focus on social and political messages, where photorealists would distance themselves far away from all of that. And just as a little bonus for you guys, I'm going to list my two most favorite hyperrealist artists.